So to kind of go away from gameplay and transition into franchise, to me, it's kind of been the forgotten part of Madden for the past few years. I know they went through and they put in some of those animated scenes last year and they've tried to do everything they can to bring depth, but at the end of the day, it's still much like gameplay has that kind of stale repetitive feel where the same complaints people have had for years and years of years continue to just mount up. So when you think about right now, the last time you really delved into a franchise mode in Madden, enjoyed it, and had replayability, to me, it's probably been 10 years since I really felt I could do that. How long do you think it's been for you since you've had that experience?
It's been the last time I really played like seriously in the franchise mode was Madden '07. But part of the and don't get me wrong, like pretty much after the PS2, it started going downhill. I know some people say like Madden 12 wasn't too bad, but like for me, after Madden '07 is when I started playing the game more seriously online. So for me, I stopped playing franchise more so because I fell more in love with just competing against players online than I did playing against the computer. But there have been times I've tried to go back to franchise mode and kind of like recapture that, and I just can't do it. And I think part of the reason is because there's just not enough there. It does get boring too quickly. Whereas like with NBA 2K, I can play through a franchise and have fun because there's more to do in the franchise mode. Um, but it it's still the most played mode in the game. I'm pretty sure by a good margin because a lot of people buy Madden and never even take it online. They just play offline, and a lot of people I don't even think understand that. Like a lot of people think MUT is the biggest mode. Don't get me wrong, MUT has a lot of players, but it's franchise and offline players. I think still outnumber the people that take the game online. So you need to invest back into that mode, and I think they know that. And the last 2 years, I think we have to acknowledge the last 2 years have been steps in the right direction. Because if you look at, I would say maybe what Madden 13 up until 18, you didn't really see much done to franchise at all. I didn't follow it as closely as you did, obviously, but I don't really remember much being done. And 13 is when the mode just got completely gutted, which I don't think a lot of people know why that actually happened. But the problem is they've done a bad job of building it out since then, a really bad job. And I think these last 2 years, I think 19 and now 20, they've finally been making those steps in the right direction to build it back out, where it was definitely forgotten for quite a few years there.
To me in franchise, and this goes across really any sporting game, there's a couple things that have to be done well for it to be successful. And Madden, they have made steps, but still struggles in all those areas. The first of which is stat tracking. Stat tracking in Madden has continually been an issue in trying to get realistic numbers. Into that same point, you really have an issue with communication of whether a player is retiring or not. Secondly, would be injuries. And although Madden has done steps in the right direction to get off ball injuries, it's still kind of a mess. Players go down, it's basically scripted, there's no real visual representation of what happens. And basically, it just leaves a very unfulfilled obligation to you as a coach or I guess player to realize, oh, well, all of a sudden this player got hurt. Now he's out 4 weeks. Here's what you can do in terms of your recovery. And lastly, since we just talked about coaches, it's really been maybe 10 years or more since Madden had those coordinators. And when we talk about the things you're doing to gameplay to make players unique, so much of that also needs to be tied to the coaches, to the coordinators. And the fact that there is no coaching carousel in Madden, I think probably in one statement surmises how poorly this franchise mode has grown.
Yeah, definitely. So this was the thing that I was told by a former developer, and I'm actually gonna have a video like on the interview, probably within a week or two. But just to talk about it here, so if you noticed, every time Madden kind of switched a generation, it lost all of its franchise mode features, and people always chalk that up to, well, they're just like taking stuff out to sell it back later. Which, I mean, marketing wise, I guess that makes sense, right? If and that's how it's kind of just fell for them. But really, so from what he told me was that when they, were going to like the 360 PS3 gen, right? Like they had to lose pretty much everything. And apparently they were supposed to, Madden '07 was supposed to be the year that they did a complete rebuild, complete rehaul going in next gen. But I don't remember exactly why. He said, I have to look at my notes, but something happened and they had to kind of rebuild some of it, but some of it they had to take over. They lost mostly the franchise features, and then by the time you got to like Madden 08, Madden 09, it started getting built back out. Go to Madden 12, you had a pretty decent franchise mode, and then you went from 12 to 13, it was completely gutted, and no one really understood why. They're like, well, we're in the middle of a generation. Why did all the features go away? Well, apparently they built a new engine for just for franchise so that they would not have to lose features again, because if they kept doing what they were doing, they would have had to lose the features every generation. They would have had to do the same thing over and over. So they had to make that kind of conscious decision to say, hey, we're in the middle of a generation here, but let's build this new franchise engine. They weren't able to salvage anything, but they're like, after we build it all back out, we'll never have to lose the features again. So it was like a necessary evil. Now, what they did a shitty job of is building the stuff back out, because there was a few years there where he said that franchise didn't really get a lot for resources, and some of the leadership didn't care as much about franchise. So we had those few years where it was like, okay, well, why aren't y'all building it back out? And now you see with 19, it was like, okay, draft classes, archetype system, depth chart position. Now 20, you see Pro Bowl finally back. You see scenario engine. They're saying, oh, we redid contracts. They're starting to do this. So now they're finally getting to it. And I think that's because Mike Young's saying, okay, we want to recommit. But the problem is they should have recommitted, after 13, going into 25, 16. We should be where we were in the old days right now, but we're not because of whatever lack of leadership of building and resources to get the stuff back. But I guess the good news with that is once they do get it built back, is that from what he was saying, now he doesn't work there anymore, but from what he was saying, they shouldn't lose things after that because they won't have to anymore. And that was the whole purpose of building that engine. So, I mean, I feel like that's good news, but the bad news is like, well, how long do we have to wait to get the stuff back? I think next year, if they can bring coordinators and carousel in, I would think that's like one of the highest things on top of the list for franchise now. Get the coordinators in, better scouting, and then probably training camp. I think if they can maybe nail those three next year, then we're like kind of cooking again. But like you said, it's a lot of the little stuff. It's like the devil's in the details. Like I hear this from a lot of franchise, like, diehards, is like the stat tracking's terrible. Like the historic stats, or just like sim stats are still like, they try to make the sim stats as real as possible, but they're still just really weird and nonsensical most of the time. So it's really the little things they still have to nail down, because even if you have all the features, it's cool, but if the stats are unrealistic and things like that, it still takes away from the immersion of what the mode's supposed to be. So I think I'm hoping that by Madden 22, like franchise should really be what it's supposed to be, but it's all going to be in how much they invest for 21 and 22. Because I think 20, they've made steps in the right direction. It's just, will they continue to do that same amount of effort for the next couple years to get it back to where it needs to be?
Yeah, and it's too little too late, in my opinion. And a lot of what you said there is true, but you also have to remember you're dealing constantly with different leadership, different ideas, different, ideologies. I mean, heck, I think a year or two ago we had, the short-term leader there. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but, he's only there for like a month before he got outed. Basically said,
Carlos
no matter
Pereira.
what. Yes, exactly. There you go. No matter what they do, it's never going to be enough. If you have somebody take that approach, well, then yeah, you're going to have that problem. To me, the fact that even there, you just said, Madden 22, it's almost like you have to look past the current Madden and say, okay, it's not where I want it to be. It's not where it should be, but I'm going to rest my hopes a year or two down the road. And to that point, when someone has that mindset, and I think you probably deal with this a little bit more than I do, the community gravitates to that and says, hey, this person is unrealistic. This person is apologizing for EA. This person is making excuses. And while you're not specifically doing that, a lot of people take it that way, because all you're doing is looking at where it is, where it has been, where it needs to go, and kind of making that rational decision that it isn't all going to happen in 1 year. And for that matter, what they put in now, I don't expect to fully work for the first year. The scenario engine, sure, it sounds great, but we've learned so little about it. And when you take into consideration the way things like the storylines have worked in the past, even just going to the news and following the Twitter, it's so disconnected. It's so randomized. It's so all of a sudden these things happen. Whereas before, you go back to Madden 05, sure, the Tony Bruno show was recorded in advance and all they did was play it. Sure, the messages were dramatically similar in terms of, you know, what they were saying to you, but at the same time, it was still there and it functioned. And when you don't build upon that, that's where I start to have a real problem, because if you're not building upon something, you're not making it better. And if you're not bringing in things that are better, then it just looks to be like the forgotten game mode. And to me, franchise has been the forgotten game mode for a very long time. And naturally, a lot of people want to make that distinction because it's not bringing in Madden money. It's not bringing in MUT. You're not buying coins or contracts or anything along those lines. Naturally, it would be one of the most neglected. Now, as content creators, you and me look out and see franchise mode as one of the more lucrative ways you can build a channel outside of MUT. You know, nobody does a play now channel. Nobody does a single game channel. They do a franchise channel. They do a MUT channel. Nobody really does a long shot channel. So when you look at it from our standpoint, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense the directions EA chooses to go.
Well, yeah, I mean, going back to what you said about like, because I mean, I do get that all the time. Clearly, it's like, oh, well, you know, you're too much of an EA apologist or this or that. But I guess being a little bit more on the inside, it's just when I talk about things, I'm approaching it as like a realist. Like, yes, franchise mode shouldn't be in the state it's in. Yes, it should be way better right now. Like, we should have something at least more closely on the level that like an NBA 2K has. Or I don't really play MLB The Show, but from what I hear, you know, it's definitely better than what we have here. But I just look at it as a realist of saying like, well, I kind of know why some of these things happened. I know that there's like a gap in here where EA dragged their feet and they were, you know, they deserve all the backlash and you know, they don't really deserve. This is my thing. I'll never say like, oh, EA deserves praise for finally making steps in the right direction they should have been making for the last 10 years. But how I approach it is saying that this is what it is, and this is probably the best case scenario, or this is the light at the end of the tunnel approach that I try to take when I say, oh, 22. And that really, you're right, that is the case with Madden. It always seems like you're looking past this year to the next year. Like, that's how I felt about 19, because 19 didn't really bring much to the table. I mean, real player motion was the big feature, and like, even when we were down at EA and, you know, about a month or so before the game came out, maybe 2 months, and we knew at that time that like that was the big feature, you know, we all, because people say, oh, the game changers are just kind of kiss ass or this or that. We all in agreement were like hounding them. We're like, this isn't enough. Like, and they were just very sure that, hey, you know, real player motion, we think that when people see how it works, and then most people didn't even like it. That was like the funny thing about it. But we kept telling them, we're like, man, can y'all just maybe, like, we knew it was too late to like build some big new feature out. Like, we understand that, okay, at this point it is what it is. So we were just like grasping for anything. We're like, man, can maybe you know, update the playbooks a little bit more, add some new plays. Like, how much time do we have? We're just like, this isn't enough. And we knew that, but it's like, all you can do at that point is try to look at the best of it. So then, you know, I'm out here making videos. I'm like, well, you know, if real player motion, you start kind of being glass half full, maybe to your own detriment. I'm like, well, you know, if real player motion is, you know, because we had played was still an early version. It wasn't polished. So I'm like, you know, if real player motion really can be what they're selling it to be, like, that would make the gameplay better. That would make the game really great, you know, but none of that turned out being true. And then it's like, you kind of look like the idiot of like trying to be glass half full about the game when, you know, we all know that it should have more than it does now. But I just try to be a realist. I know that franchise mode, especially now adding in the career mode back, like, they're going to build all this out equally now. I think that's the approach they're taking of like, hey, we're going to put this, you know, 20% in the MUT, 20% in the franchise, 20% in the career mode, you know, and then hopefully like 40% in the gameplay, because that's still the most important. But they're going to build everything out kind of equally now, whereas for years you saw other areas of the game get more resources than franchise did. And I don't think any area of the game should necessarily get more than the other. I think you could argue that for franchise now just because it was neglected. So it's like, hey, this needs some catch up. But especially now bringing back in career mode, and they still have a lot to do with that. I mean, we only have QB, so they have a lot to build out with that. I think you're going to see the next few years, they're going to keep building all these modes equally. And that's why when I say, okay, 22, we have something to like really sink our teeth into. But it's like, for the time being, it's like, if you're a hardcore franchise player, if this still isn't enough for you, it's like, well, what am I supposed to do for these 2 years? Just wait, because and like you say, it's too little too late, because it should have been there. So it's like, people are tired of waiting. But I just try to look at it as a realist and say, well, like, no matter what we want in the game, no matter how deep we want every mode to be, if they've recommitted to it, great, but they're not going to put it all back in 1 year. They couldn't, even if they wanted to. There's only so much time in a dev cycle. So it's like, we just have to hope that they give every mode equal attention and priority every year going forward, like they have done for these past 2 years, and not revert back to kind of like neglecting an area of the game. Because I don't think any area of the game should ever be neglected. Even MUT, as much as people might not like that, it's like there are a lot of people that love that mode, just like franchise heads love franchise. Everybody deserves their mode to get built upon, upgraded, and innovated on, I feel like. So I just hope that they continue to do that. But you're right. If you have like it's the too little too late attitude, like no one can argue with that because EA deserves that. They've earned that kind of attitude. So it's nobody's fault but their own, at least in terms of franchise and like gameplay. They did that to themselves. So it's just about I still just hope for the better days, I guess you could say.
I remember when I was there at EA for Madden 25 and I watched the trailer about the player movement and, players that could be smart contextually and look at what was going on supposedly and, automatically leap and things along those lines. And I thought to myself, much like you kind of said, like, wow, that's it. You're going to sell this feature, you're going to sell this benefit, and you almost have to sigh a little bit, right? Like, it's strange because it took, even after I went to EA, you can actually see it happen as people, come to your channel and they see your content. It probably took me a good 2 or 3 years before people got out of that, oh, well, maybe you didn't sell out ideology. And the only way you can do that, like you said, is to continue to just be as upfront with your content as possible and say, listen, this is where the game is, this is the problems the game has, and this is why we shouldn't be here. But to your point where you said before, 2K, NBA The Show, those aren't games I play, but constantly get those kind of games brought up with people on my channel. You should go do this, you should go do that, because look at how great these franchise modes. I would say, obviously your channel larger than mine, your success has been meteoric, and I'm very proud of that for you, and I'm happy that people can continue to be successful with Madden, but a lot of people can't find that success. And to me, a lot of the things that hold back the content creators with this game are the problems this game has. This game, almost in a nutshell, hinders itself to the user, but also to the creator, because I can't show you more than the game shows me. And this game continually fails to deliver across all platforms for that matter. And it's ironic you brought up MUT there, because when I'm looking at the screens for MUT this year, I'm thinking to myself, man, that is a very, very streamlined screen. It's a stark contrast, and it may be the biggest contrast that we've seen from MUT 1 year to the next. And I wonder how those fans are going to receive that, because I think, if anything, if you turn those MUT fans away, if you do something that they don't like, when you're talking about taking away grinding, taking away maybe more of, or taking away more of the solo challenge effect and putting in more of a team effect, man, I'm telling you, if you can get those guys against you, Madden's in real trouble, because they don't have other game modes really that those people can fall back to. They're not going to go back to Play Now. They're not going to go back to competitive Madden, no matter how much money you throw in a tournament. They watch these tournaments on TV. They see what's going on. They see, as you and I do, not a platform where this can be a true esport and be competitive based on how fractured the gameplay is. It's a huge risk. We talked about earlier, a make or break year. Madden has made this a make or break year. They've put all the chips on the table. They know where the community stands. And I feel like if these things that they're putting out there are kind of met with that sigh and met with that shrug, you're going to have a real problem in your hands trying to get people to recommit to this product, because I'm sorry, you've sold us the same story every single year and you failed to deliver it. And last year, Madden 19, more than any other year, it seemed like people had caught on to that and were tired of that rhetoric.
Yeah, no, I think like in terms of like what they did with MUT too, I like kind of something that I viewed with the MUT stuff last night is it seems like they're I really truly believe and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I think they're trying to make changes to MUT to attract people to it, that because if you think about MUT, because a lot of people, I see this a lot of times, like, oh, casual players play MUT, and that couldn't be further from the truth. MUT, just like franchise, is an extremely hardcore player mode, and if you've ever played MUT, the first time you've gone into MUT, like, it's overwhelming, and even when you know MUT, it's overwhelming. There's just so much that goes on about having to know what the players are worth, what you have to do to accomplish something, the sets you have to do. There's so many things in the menus to navigate, so I feel like by them trying to streamline that, like they're saying with the missions and making things easier and kind of like guiding you into what you need to do, to me, that sounds like they're trying to attract the people that maybe are too overwhelmed to try MUT. Because even if you're a franchise guy, no matter what type of guy you are, MUT has everybody's at least looked at MUT, I feel like, for the most part, once or twice and said, well, the idea, the concept is cool, but what turns them off is the money and how overwhelming it is. That's what turns people off. But I think what they're doing by streamlining it is like, okay, we're trying to take some of that overwhelming aspect of it out. And then now with what they were talking about in terms of how you're going to earn the rewards now and not having to grind through maybe as much as before to earn the better rewards, that can attract the people that don't like spending money and saying, well, if it's a little bit easier for me to grind to get stuff, because that's how it is in MLB The Show. You get a lot better stuff for the time spent grinding. At least this year you do. And I think that's what they're trying to do is say, well, for what are the people that have a problem with MUD? It's people that are just overwhelmed by it or the people that don't want to spend money. So let's try to make it easier for those players and get them in here to enjoy the mode. So I think that's what they're trying to do with that. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing at all. But like you said, it is a make or break year. I don't think it's a make or break year for MUT players. I don't think anything's going to turn MUT players off. And the only thing that could really turn MUT players off is just bad content. And they're usually pretty decent with the content. Like late in the year, they'll get a little lazy with it, kind of moving on to next year. But usually the first half of the year, they're pretty good in terms of content. And that's really all that MUT players care about. So as long as that's there, they're going to still play. But it is still a make or break year for a lot of people in terms of gameplay and like, franchise. I think if the scenario engine is what they're selling it to be, then I think that can help revive franchise this year because the storylines and that element of it, if it really matters, like they're saying it's going to matter, that's going to keep it from being so boring and monotonous. And like how you talked about how they had the Tony Bruno show and stuff and it kind of got repetitive. I think the thing too that people don't realize is like for the time though, that was innovative. Like that was great for the time. Something like that isn't going to be considered great for right now. It's like we've had that. We need better. We need something that is fluid and lives and breathes and can change at any notice. We don't want to see the same things repeated because that was fine in 05 because we never had anything like it, but that's not going to fly now. And that's what we hope the scenario engine isn't. But yeah, and I think part of like the whole, like you said, like with Madden 19 kind of not delivering. And I think a part of that too that people overlook is, Rex really, I think midway through the year was like kind of already out. Because I remember being down there and he told us that he was going to be leaving. It was like a few of us and we were the first people to know. And the official announcement didn't come out for months later. So he already told us this at that time. And it was maybe like April. And he might not have told everybody else till maybe June. So it's like, I wonder how involved he was with 19. Like they switched in the middle of the year. They didn't really have like a leader. So it's like, I think that might have been part of the problem with 19 not having as much. And now 20, because 20 compared to 19 is like over delivering compared to what 19 did. So it is definitely a make or break year in a lot of aspects. I don't think MUT is make or break, but I think the changes they're doing is definitely going to attract more people to the mode than previous. I don't think it's going to turn people away necessarily.